Dr. Foxx, can you tell us how you first got into politics, having always been an educator?
Well, I used to go to school board meetings in Watauga County as an observer, and one night the school board was being particularly incompetent, and a man sitting next to me said, "Why didn't you run for the school board?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not qualified." And he said, "You mean you're not as qualified as those turkeys are?" And I had a master's degree at that time and was working at Appalachian State University, and I said, "Well, yes, I guess I am." And so I ran for the school board. I lost the first time I ran, which I think was a great blessing because I learned you could run for public office and lose and still live. And even though it was very low budget, very low impact race, it's still hard to lose, but I lost, and then I ran 2 years later and I won. I wound up serving 12 years on the school board. I do think that many people who have wonderful capabilities for serving in office have the attitude that I had that first time, "Oh no, I'm not qualified." And I do think women in particular have that attitude. They think they need to know everything there is about a job before they go into it. I served on the school board for 12 years. I was president of a community college at the end of my term on the school board, and I decided not to run for a fourth term. I stayed out of elective office. Then in 1994, I was asked to run for the state senate by the party in a district that no Republican had ever won. And they sweet-talked me into running, and I did, and I won. I did that for 10 years. And then I ran for Congress in 2004 when there was an open seat. I come from a very, very poor background. I grew up in a house with no electricity and no running water. So I never thought in my early days that I'd ever be involved in elected politics. But I'm very glad that I did go in that direction. I've enjoyed it. I never had a plan for my life. I've just tried to do very well the job that was given to me and hope that I could discern the next step that God wanted me to take. And it seems I've been able to do that so far because I haven't lost an election since that first election. So I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
As a Republican, what does being conservative mean to you?
Being conservative to me means that we want to diminish the role of government in our lives. I think the founding people of our country wanted a very small federal government. They wrote the Constitution and they planned our government to minimize the role of the federal government and to maximize personal responsibility. So that's what conservatives want. We want the government to have the smallest role possible in our lives, and particularly at the federal level. Now, we need government. There's no question that we need government. We need government to keep us from having chaos. And up until the 60s in this country, we had a relatively conservative government. Things started changing some after World War II with things where the government started getting involved. And many of the things that liberals want to do are good things. I don't say that their motives are bad, but the government never does anything as efficiently and effectively as the private sector does. And so what conservatives want is to let people keep as much of their money as possible and let them solve their problems. Certainly, we don't need to be solving the problems of education and health care at the national level. Those things should be done at the local level. We know that's what works. It's always worked. So that's the way we should do it. If conservatives want us to, again, diminish the role of government, one of the problems that we have right now is that too many members of Congress try to solve the problems for people that people need to solve themselves.
Do you think it would be beneficial to use more media coverage, more social networking to promote accountability and transparency, and also to get other sides of each issue?
Oh yes, I think that we have very one-sided coverage of what's happening in the Congress, what's happening in our society generally, and I think we need to help the American people, again, think about the other ways of looking at issues. As Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story, you'd hear other sides. And I think we absolutely need to talk about more transparency. We also need to talk about, again, the role of the federal government and how that's changed. We need to talk more about how economics works, because so many Americans don't understand basic economics and how when the government's spending money, it's taking that money out of the private sector and what impact that has. We also need to talk, I think, a lot about why our country is structured the way it is. And again, the founders, I think, did a brilliant job of setting up our government. It doesn't mean that we don't need to tweak areas occasionally, but you know, our Constitution has stood us in good stead for over 200 years. There have only been 27 amendments to it, but many people don't understand the basic rights and responsibilities that they have. There's always a lot of emphasis on rights, but not about responsibilities. And the way that authority should be divided among the federal, state, and local governments. I think that's something we should be dealing with.
What are the key topics that the Congress will have to tackle in the upcoming months, especially to achieve a conservative agenda?
Well, what we should be dealing with is our economic situation. Our debt is completely out of control. Our deficit is way too high. And so what we need to be dealing with is how do we cut back spending at the federal level. This is going to be very difficult for the liberals who are now in control of Congress to get their arms around, because they want to spend more money and they want to take more and more control by the government of our lives. That's what we should be doing. Whether we will do that is another issue. I think the election in Massachusetts last week showed that the American people are very angry about the direction the government's going in, but I'm not sure that message has been heard by those people in charge of the Congress. But we definitely need to deal with our economic situation. It looks like we will probably have inflation around the corner if we keep spending, if the Fed keeps printing more dollars. So we need to be prepared for that, and we need to look for ways to cut spending.